Hi, I'm Niles Niemuth, the Socialist Equality Party's candidate for Congress in Michigan's 12th District. I'm speaking today, we're going to be speaking today about the CIA Democrats in the midterm elections.
Hi, I'm Patrick Martin. I'm the senior U.S. political writer for the World Socialist website and the author of the series on the CIA Democrats and subsequent materials that have exposed the role of these agents of the U.S. government in American politics.
So Marty, you've written a lot on the World Socialist website about the issue of what we're calling the CIA Democrats. I was wondering if you could explain for our viewers what we mean by CIA Democrats, who we're talking about.
Well, the CIA Democrats is the name we've given to a group, originally about 55 candidates, who were running in Democratic primaries for the congressional nominations in competitive seats. That is, the seats that the Democratic Party itself has targeted to take over to capture the net gain of 23 seats that they need to win control of the House of Representatives. The Democratic Party has occasionally had groups of veterans running, but in the past they usually were sacrificial lambs in heavily Republican seats. The competitive seats where they had a good chance to win were reserved for party regulars, multimillionaires, prominent lawyers, and so on. But this year is very different. And as it developed through the primaries, 30 of these candidates won nominations in competitive seats, and quite a large number of them are actually favored to win in November. And while we call them CIA Democrats, there's two that are actually in the CIA or from the CIA, 4 that were intelligence agents for other branches of the military or the FBI, a dozen or so who were military commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan, some who were special forces operatives, which means essentially they were trained assassins working for the military, and then another group were either State Department war planners or National Security Council war planners. In some cases, actually, the people directly responsible for planning all U.S. military and political operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. One of them, for instance, is running here in Michigan in the 8th Congressional District, Alyssa Slotkin, who makes no bones about her role. She was a 3-tour CIA agent in Baghdad. She then worked for the Bush White House, and then for the Obama White House, and then for the Pentagon. And her credentials for running for Congress, for representing the people of the 8th District, which includes Lansing and Livingston County and part of Oakland County, is that she spent 15 years either directly carrying out or planning mass murder overseas.
Right, and she's been endorsed by a whole host of war criminals, including John Negroponte,
yes,
and a number of others.
There are 4 prominent Republicans: John Negroponte, who was the first director of national intelligence, Stephen Hadley, who was Bush's national security advisor, and a couple of others who have endorsed Slotkin over her Republican opponent because of their personal relationship with her and the fact that they worked with her for many years in Washington on this type of horrific literally criminal activity.
Well, what do you think it says about the midterms, the character of the Democrats and their opposition to Trump, the fact that they're running all of these CIA Democrats?
Well, there's a coincidence, or put it this way, it's an expression of a political trend, because the Democratic Party has sought to oppose Trump largely by means of the Russia campaign. The claim, if you boil it down to the simplest terms, that Russia was indispensable in getting Trump elected president because it bought $75,000 worth of ads on Facebook, if you accept their argument, and it helped release emails that had been hacked from the Democratic National Committee and from Clinton's campaign manager, campaign chairman, John Podesta. Now, of course, the whole anti-Russia campaign is preposterous and is a cover-up for the fact that the Clinton campaign was a right-wing, anti-working class campaign that aroused no support among workers in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which is why they lost them. But in making this appeal to the military intelligence agencies and serving as their instrument for putting pressure for a more aggressive anti-Russian foreign policy, the Democratic Party has also opened its doors to personnel drawn from the military intelligence apparatus who are going to be a major component of the Democratic caucus in Congress. If they win control of the House, which they're now favored to do, the estimates are that they'll have a 10 to 20 seat majority in the House of Representatives after November 6th. These military intelligence Democrats will hold the margin of power. They'll be the ones who can decide whether Pelosi is to be the Speaker, whether legislation is to go forward, whether Trump is to be impeached, and so on and so forth. They will have a decisive influence. And it will be the first time in American history that people who are drawn so directly and immediately, most of these people went directly from service in the military and the CIA to running for Congress. Now, there's a handful that ran for other offices first, before they ran for Congress. Most of them have gone straight from, as they put it in an NBC report, is this another form of service? Is this another operation? And that's a good question, which we can't, of course, give you a definitive answer at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about just about how outrageous this is. I mean, you think about the CIA and its long criminal record. This is a criminal organization which has been operating for decades, overthrowing governments, torturing people, corrupting the political process in almost every single country, any country that sort of opposes the United States in any sort of way. And the fact that they can just sort of run as candidates, and there's no sort of criticism of it in the media. Or you think about somebody like Alyssa Slotkin. She boasts about the fact that she served in Iraq. She put out this ad where it's got pictures of 9/11, it's got pictures of Iraq, and she's boasting about her service to country and the fact that it was so wonderful that she served both George W. Bush and Obama in the war in Iraq.
Right. Her ads don't say that 1 million people died.
Yeah, and they don't say anything. Yeah, she's not critical of the war. She's not saying we should end the wars. She's saying, look, I served my country, and you should vote for me. And there's I mean, you think about the coverage that's been in the media. I think the World Socialist website has been the only news site to actually cover this phenomenon critically.
Well, over the past 6 months, since the series was first published and with various follow-up materials, it has become the most widely read material published by the World Socialist website this year. I've also had a number of interview requests from left-wing or radical radio hosts, podcast hosts, and so on. But the so-called mainstream media has been almost completely silent. There was the one article on NBC News' website. There was an article in the New York Times in August which lowballed the number of CIA Democrats, described them as military veterans, and said there was about a dozen. There was an article I hadn't seen until recently in late September in the Times that raised that to 24, but made no mention of the CIA. It simply talked about them as veterans. I think that there's an important change that's taking place in the political culture in this. It used to be, for many years, that the CIA was considered like political leprosy. Anyone who was close to the CIA as a career wouldn't attempt to use that as a credential for political office, and the CIA itself would bar them from talking about it because their policy was that service in the CIA was a secret, and what you did was a secret. Even if you revealed it 25 years later, that would potentially expose operations. Now you have a situation where the CIA is attempting to become a much more public entity in American political and social life. We've seen the phenomenon, which has been reported on the World Socialist website, of CIA recruitment, open CIA recruitment on college campuses. And when I was a college student, that would have been an automatic incitement to riot. No, people would have come by the thousands, not to join the CIA, but to prevent the CIA from showing up on their campus. They would have been horrified. It would have been like having the Nazis recruiting on your campus. And by the same token, you now have CIA recruiting on campuses, and people who were in the CIA, like Slotkin and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, openly citing this as a positive credential in their campaign to become a congressman.
Right, they have pictures on their websites of them in flak jackets in Iraq, standing in front of tanks. And this is a great thing. I just want to say that I just want to thank everyone who's tuned in right now, watching us live. We have people watching from all over the world, from Morocco, Sri Lanka. Here in the United States, we have people tuning in from Missouri and elsewhere.
Not just from the 12th District.
Not just from the 12th District. Well, I'm running a campaign for Congress, obviously in the 12th District. Only people in the 12th District can vote for me. But this is a national and international campaign. We're fighting for socialism. We're obviously opposed to American imperialism, and the key factor about these CIA Democrats is that they're agents of imperialism, and they boast about it and how they're going to get into Congress and they're going to support the military, more funding for wars, and we're fighting to build an anti-war movement. It's not going to come through the Democratic Party. So I just want to say to those who are viewing, you can ask any questions or leave comments below the video. We would like to see what you think. Maybe there's some of you who have read what Marty has written, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them and we can respond to them.
If I could just make one point that's related to your campaign in the 12th District. The incumbent Democratic Congresswoman, Debbie Dingell, is the lead introducer of a resolution in Congress condemning the apparent murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who went into a Saudi embassy consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and was apparently butchered, literally killed and then cut up with a bone saw and taken out in pieces by the Saudi intelligence agencies. Now, so she makes a big deal out of that, but she is running as part of a slate of Democrats for Congress, and right near her district, about 10 miles away, is a CIA agent who would have been involved, whose agency was involved in training the people who carried out this appalling act of savagery in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. I mean, you can't separate what the Saudi intelligence does from what American intelligence does. The man who was for a long time the CIA station chief in Riyadh, where these atrocities are plotted, is John Brennan, who has become the leading personality of the anti-Russia.
The Labor Day parade in Detroit, which is it's an event for the Democratic Party, and all the Democrats come. But it was notable that we were there handing out leaflets, and on one side of me was Debbie Dingell, on the other side was Alyssa Slotkin, and on the other side was Rashida Tlaib, who's a Democratic Socialist of America member, a Democratic candidate for the 13th District. So you had the whole lineup of these figures within the Democratic Party, from the CIA Democrats to the supposedly progressive Democrats to the DSA. And they're all there together. They all appear on platforms together. There's no criticism coming from supposedly progressive, or even those who might want you to think they're socialists. There's no criticism of the wars or the CIA coming from them.
Let me add the fourth horseman of this particular Democratic Party apocalypse, along with Rashida Tlaib and Alyssa Slotkin and Debbie Dingell, is Haley Stevens, who is the Democratic candidate in the 11th District, which is the district that actually separates the 12th District from the 8th District, so she's right in there, in between all these three districts. Her claim to fame is that she was the chief of staff of Obama's auto task force, which means that she bore personal responsibility for the deal which cut the pay of new hired auto workers at General Motors and Chrysler by 50%. That's her credential. That's what she's running on. And she got tremendous financial support and is now considered to be virtually a shoo-in for the next congresswoman from the 11th District, which includes much of suburban Detroit, Livonia, Farmington Hills, down to Romulus in that area. So this is the character of the Democratic Party. It's the auto bosses, it's, as you said, from the CIA to the DSA with big business in between.
I think that's a good tagline. I think we should use that in an article. We have our first question coming in here, and the question is if you could speak to the militarization of high schools and college campuses. In particular, the International Youth and Students for Social Equality has been waging a campaign just launched last month against the involvement of the CIA on university campuses, in particular at the University of Illinois Chicago, where they have a special program where they're recruiting students into the CIA. And of course, we've seen with the phenomenon of mass shootings, there's been a militarization of high schools, deployment of police, militarization of the police that are operating on schools. So maybe you could speak just a bit about that and the role that the CIA is playing.
Well, so far as I know, the CIA is playing a role in certain college campuses. I don't think they've yet gone down to the high school level, but the military is increasingly present. And of course, the militarization of college campuses of high school campuses is largely being conducted under the false flag of fighting against gun violence, the phenomenon of school shootings on high school campuses. And that became, so when the students went back to school at Parkland in Florida, there was 30 armed police patrolling the high school. And some students may support that because they're not given any alternative under the present system. But generally, what they're doing is they're trying to accustom the population from a very early age to the type of conditions that we would normally refer to as a police state. That is one in which there are armed men on virtually every street corner, when it's perfectly routine for you to be stopped and asked to prove your identity, even prove your citizenship. We're not that far from a society. Papers, please. Every movie you read that you watch about the World War II and the Nazis, you always have a scene where the heroine or the hero is stopped by a very evil-looking, frequently uniformed person. Papers, please. And of course spoken with a German accent. Well, now this is going to be done with an American accent.
Right. Well, and it's already happening with immigrants in the United States. Yeah. I was wondering, in the 60s there were a lot of protests against military, the involvement of the Pentagon, the CIA on campuses, particularly in the protests against the Vietnam War. I guess maybe you speak more to why should students be opposed to the CIA being on their campus?
Well, I get asked questions about the 60s because I was actually a participant. But no, it's true. In the 60s, there was the anti-war movement was of such a massive character and had such deep popular roots that you had certainly in all the major cities intense involvement of high school young people, marching in demonstrations as contingents, walking out. When there were college walkouts, there would be high school walkouts, protesting against the presence of military recruiters, particularly protesting over the draft, because in those days the draft was in effect and you became eligible for the draft when you reached in the year in which you reached your 19th birthday. So the last year in high school was normally when you were thinking about what was going to happen to you. But as far as the CIA on the campuses goes, recruitment not only recruitment of agents, which is a specific feature of these, but recruitment of informants is a critical CIA function and always has been. The CIA is barred by law from conducting overt spy activities within the borders of the United States. That was part of the law that set it up because there was so much concern in 1946, 47 about the example of the Gestapo. And the United States had fought a war in the name of opposing fascism and opposing a police state. When there was a lot of opposition even to making the wartime OSS, which was the Foreign Intelligence Services during the war, of making that a permanent civilian agency in peacetime. And in order to overcome that, they had to include in the law a specific prohibition that the CIA could not engage in spying on Americans on American soil. Of course, the FBI has that authority, and that's not exactly an upgrade. But as a result, the CIA is limited in its operations from a legal standpoint to recruitment of new personnel and to following people who were coming into the United States who had attracted its attention overseas. But one of the main things that the CIA does, and this is usually through cutouts like the Agency for International Development, is that it seeks to recruit foreign students who are studying on American campuses to become informants when they go back to their home countries. So, for example, you had this speech by Mike Pence last week where he howled about the 300,000 Chinese students who were in America, saying that these are all potentially spies for the People's Republic of China. Well, the actual relationship is somewhat different. The U.S. government is ferociously pursuing these 300,000 students, seeking to find among them people who will agree to be spies for the United States when they go back to the People's Republic of China. And one of the aspects of this anti-Chinese campaign is to put pressure on vulnerable students. For instance, if you're a Chinese student in the United States and you do something, you have a drunk driving accident, you have a drug arrest, or anything like that that will make you vulnerable to government pressure or prosecution, or perhaps even to being kicked out of the country. Those students will then be targeted. If you agree to provide information, we will not kick you out. All right, that's what they're doing. And that is happening on a very large scale, and it generally involves the CIA using either local police or the FBI or AID or some other agency to identify and funnel these students into its core of informants.
Just getting back to this question of the nexus between the CIA Democrats and the Democratic Socialists of America. There's a lot of talk now about the increasing popularity of socialism, the fact that young people and workers are increasingly interested in socialism, but whenever that's talked about, like in the New York Times or anywhere else in the mainstream media, it's always the Democratic Socialists of America that are being promoted. And figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, who won the primary, is going to be the representative for the district there. They're always promoted as sort of proof that the Democratic Party is moving to the left. I was wondering, maybe we could speak more about this notion that really promoted by the DSA and other pseudo-left organizations, that the Democratic Party can be transformed into a vehicle for progressive change. It can be transformed into a pro-working class party.
Well, I think it's fairly obvious if you do the math that there are 10 military intelligence candidates for every DSA candidate running for the Democratic Party in the fall. You have a handful, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are actual DSA members. Then there's a few others who are considered to be slightly to the left of center, like Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts, Ilhan Omar in Minnesota. But the bulk of the new members of Congress will be either these military intelligence types. There's 30 of them that we've identified. There's about 24 or 25 who are already proven Democratic Party hacks who are in the state legislature usually. There's about 20 or so wealthy lawyers and multimillionaires. And then there's the 3 or 4 DSA people. So if you just do the numbers, it's very clear that the Democratic Party in its personnel is not moving in that direction. But I think there's another element in the whole process. The Democratic Party leadership and the ruling class as a whole were genuinely horrified by what happened in 2016. They weren't frightened by Bernie Sanders. After all, Bernie Sanders has been around for 30 years and has never threatened the interests of the capitalist class in the slightest. But when he ran for president, he thought, and they thought, that he was going to play the role of court jester like Dennis Kucinich did in 2004. He was going to make some left noises, give the Democratic Party a bit of left comedy act, and then he was going to be shunted out of the way when the Hillary Express train would go through. Unfortunately, they discovered that there were millions and millions of young people and workers who supported Sanders not despite the fact that he called himself a socialist, but because he called himself a socialist, because they wanted socialism. They might not have been exactly clear about what socialism was, but they knew it wasn't capitalism, and they hated capitalism. So the Sanders campaign, despite the best intentions of the candidate, became an exposure of how much young people and workers hate capitalism in America. And of course the capitalists were not very happy about that. So one of the things that they want to make sure about in 2018 is that nothing like that ever happens again. So I think that one reason for the influx of these military intelligence types is to make sure that the Democratic Party, whatever the cosmetic left gestures that they carry out, and they're still using Sanders for that purpose, remains firmly an instrument of the ruling elite. They're not going to let this get away. The Democratic Party has been an instrument of the ruling class in this country for 200 years. You know, they value it, they're not giving it up. And those who try to tell you that you can somehow wrest control of the Democratic Party from the ruling class might as well propose that you take control of Chase Manhattan, you know, or Citibank, the Catholic, or the CIA. And there are those who will claim, oh, the CIA participating in the Democratic Party is an indication that the CIA is moving to the left. Well, you know, the fact is these are ruling class institutions. They are not going to just let them go. And
there'll be people who say, when we criticize Sanders, they'll say, oh, yes, you're right, but he's made socialism popular again, or he's made it a good word. But I think the point that you made is it wasn't Sanders that made socialism popular.
And the rooster made the sunrise.
Anti-capitalist sentiments. It was the capitalist system itself. It was the crisis of 2008. It was the fact that millions of people lost their homes, they lost their jobs. You had young people going through these experiences as well, seeing their parents suffering, and there's this massive anti-capitalist sentiment that's been built up, and the Democratic Party, what they've seen, 8 years of Obama was bailing out the banks, forcing through Obamacare, which was presented as a progressive program, but is a major attack on healthcare, forcing workers to buy health insurance, which is totally subpar. Students have had to pile up debt in order to go to school, in order to get a job. So really, it's the capitalist system itself that is driving these objective developments. And Sanders came along, and they weren't really expecting him to get that sort of response. And all of a sudden, he gets 13 million votes. So really, I think it's we have to expose Sanders and the role that he's playing, giving a left face to a very right-wing, pro-war, pro-capitalist party.
Well, he's going to be here in Michigan.
He's going to be here on Friday. He's helping Gretchen Whitmer, Debbie Dingell.
And I'm sure that on the platform with Bernie Sanders on Friday at Rackham Amphitheater in Ann Arbor is going to be Alyssa Slotkin.
Yeah.
Because she's running in the 8th District, which is very close, just down the road from Ann Arbor. I would not be surprised that the lineup that we described, which is from the DSA to the CIA, is actually literally, physically on the platform behind Bernie Sanders, from Alyssa Slotkin to Rashida Tlaib.
We have a number of questions coming in online, and I thank everyone for commenting, and I would ask you, please, if you have any questions, please put them in and we'll try to get to them. Before we go on, I would just like to say that we are trying to raise funds for my campaign. If you donate money today, you can get one of these posters. You can get a signed poster by me for $50 donation. And if you donate $10, you can get a button, one of these buttons. And it will really help us with our campaign. I'm the only socialist running in the midterms, so we do need your support. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can donate to the campaign. Go to Niles2018.com. And again, it's $50 for a signed poster, $10 for a button. And it would really go a long way in helping us print more flyers, help us to canvas.
And remember, you don't have to be a resident of the 12th District. I'm
Right.
not a resident of the 12th District. I can't vote for Niles, but I can wear this button, and I can, and like you can buy the button, you can buy the poster, and you can contribute to support the campaign, regardless of where you live. Of course, if you do live in the 12th District, in Downriver, Detroit, Dearborn, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, in Michigan, please vote for Niles on November the 6th.
So just getting back to some of the questions, we've been speaking a lot about the pro-war, pro-capitalist character of the Democratic Party. This is a question from a viewer online. Could you speak to the connection between the Democratic Party's pro-war, imperialist policies and its promotion of identity politics, particularly with the Me Too campaign? I think this is an important question.
Well, the first thing is that if you look at the candidates that we've identified as the CIA Democrats, nearly all of them were directly involved in the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq in either a command capacity on the ground in those countries or in a planning capacity. And in some cases they were offshore, like pilots, Navy commanders, and so on. If you look at their programmatic materials, what their platform is, none of them is drawing anti-war conclusions from their own experiences. In other words, these are people who went through the most horrific experiences, and believe me, they were horrific not just for the people who were the targets of American aggression, but they were horrific for the soldiers who were involved. PTSD, severe war wounds, and so on. But yet of the 30, there's only one that even acknowledges that he suffered PTSD. He was a combat infantryman. And none of them, even he doesn't draw explicitly anti-war conclusions. He just says you should be more careful. But most of them cite the war as these wars, war on terror, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, as heroic, necessary defenses of the American people, of the American public. In other words, you had to go 5,000 miles away to kill people in Iraq or Afghanistan because of, in the case of Slotkin, 9/11, or whatever. I mean, they all draw pro-war conclusions. And in fact, if you read their programs, those that have put up material on war and foreign policy, you would assume that they were all Bush Republicans, because none of them is saying that the war in Iraq was immoral, that the war in Iraq was based on lies, that people were sacrificed needlessly, none of that. All right, so there's that. But then there's the question of the connection to identity politics. and I hate to get personal with some of these people, but it is remarkable. Of the 30, I don't have the exact number. It's either 13 or 14 are women. About half are women. A sizable number are gay. The notion that this has anything to do with anything with progressive politics is ludicrous. In other words, what you have is the sort of retail version of those who claim that the elevation of black and female secretaries of state, corporate CEOs, and ultimately the first black president somehow changed fundamentally the nature of American imperialism. And it didn't. The fact that American imperialism was directed by a black man, that its foreign policy was directed, I think it was from 1996 to 2012, so 16 years, the State Department was led either by a woman or an African American. Madeleine Albright, followed by Colin Powell, followed by Condoleezza Rice, followed by Hillary Clinton. So 8 years of African Americans, 12 years of women. Now during that period, the United States was engaged in destroying Bosnia, Kosovo, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, and preparing for nuclear war against Russia and China. The fact that those preparations were overseen and diplomatically apologized for by African Americans and women did absolutely nothing to make these policies less pernicious, less dangerous, less threatening to the human race.
Well, and you have someone like Alyssa Slotkin who boasts about the fact that she was involved in the drone assassination program.
Yeah.
You know, she was in the Pentagon helping oversee the assassination of people by drones,
Including Americans.
including American citizens. And you know, this is presented as a great service to the country. I mean, it really is remarkable the way in which identity politics is put forward to mask these really sort of right-wing, ferocious policies, to continue the wars, promote imperialism, and they even use it to promote the wars in general. They say, well, this is a war to defend women, or we need to be in war in Afghanistan because the women are oppressed, or if we overthrow the government in Libya, that's somehow going to help women and children. But of course, they're responsible
Does not,
for
however,
the deaths of
affect our
thousands.
alliance with Saudi Arabia.
Of course, it doesn't matter with Saudi Arabia. But then they're responsible for the deaths of countless women and children, with dropping thousands of bombs every year on all of the countries that you mentioned.
If you bomb a wedding party, your bomb is, gender neutral.
So we have another question from online. It says that the viewer says, I've read many posts labeling the government fascist. I assume referring to the Trump administration. We see this police agency, the CIA, infesting the Democrats. How would you assess the labeling? I guess the labeling of the government as fascist. We move towards more attacks on free speech by the day. I assume they're referring to the increasing censorship of the internet. Facebook just recently deleted 800 pages in profiles, which, they've started this whole campaign saying that, well, there was Russian meddling in the 2016 election, and so we have to take out Russian influence on Facebook. But now these are just pages that were oppositional political pages. They don't even claim that they have anything to do with Russia. They specifically note that they are Americans who are running these pages, but they were deleted because they were oppositional. But the question then continues: how would the characterization of the state of this fascistic Trump agenda and the Democratic Party moving towards police state measures? I guess taking up the question of the Trump administration and sort of the policies that it has been pursuing. Certainly, there are fascistic figures who have been in the Trump administration who continue to operate within the administration. Stephen Bannon, Stephen Miller, that are they're the ones pushing the really anti-immigrant policies.
Right, and I think that the Trump administration is fascistic in aspiration, and in certain areas, particularly in relationship to immigrants, the techniques which are being carried out right now, we have described, and we're not the only ones who've described the Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol as the American Gestapo. As far as immigrant populations and minority populations are concerned, these agencies do function in many ways that are similar to those of a fascist state. Now, we don't live in a totalitarian society currently. That fact that we're able to do what we're doing today is a demonstration of that. Socialists don't generally run for political office and get on the ballot in a fascist state. But that's not any grounds for complacency. The driving force of the political transformation in this country is the fantastic growth of social inequality. The polarization of society between a tiny handful of unbelievably wealthy people, the Jeff Bezoses of this world. I mean, Jeff Bezos on Wednesday lost $9 billion. Think about that. He lost $9 billion because the stock market fell 832 points and Amazon's stock price fell significantly, and as a result he lost $9 billion. Now, we're not shedding any tears for Jeff Bezos. He won't miss it a minute. But his wealth fell from 160 billion to about 150 billion in the course of 24 hours. Now, so we live in a society in which this tiny handful has all the wealth, which they don't produce. All wealth is produced by human labor, and therefore it's produced by the working class. So the capitalists are acutely conscious of their own unpopularity, of the growth of deep-seated hostility towards their rule, towards their riches, despite every effort they make using the media to diffuse it and divert it. So they are putting their money where their interests lie. That is, they're building up the police. They use all kinds of pretexts, the threat of terrorism. More people have been murdered by American policemen over the last 20 years than have been killed by terrorists. You don't see a major national media campaign over the dangers of killer cops. Just the opposite.
1,000 people every year.
1,000 people every year, right? So, the war on terror is used as a pretext. The danger of crime, the danger of, although actually you're far more. You have a gun in your house. There's a greater danger that you'll use it to kill yourself than that you will be shot by an intruder, that you will be killed by an intruder. But they try to manipulate and whip up public fears to justify the buildup of the police, the military, the intelligence agencies, and so on. Because in the final analysis, you cannot preserve democratic forms of rule with such an extreme degree of economic inequality. It's never happened in history, and it won't happen today. So we have to recognize that this is an objective process that continues independently of the meager ideas, if you can call them that, in the head of Donald Trump, or the professed ideology of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. This is an objective social phenomenon. The ruling elite has no choice but to build up a police state to defend its wealth. And the workers and the young people have to recognize this objective logic and act on it from the other side of the class divide.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good point to raise. Well, what is the alternative for the working class? We talked a lot about the character of the Democratic Party, the fact that it's pro-war, pro-capitalist, the question of the Democratic Socialists of America and other pseudo-left groups which serve to promote illusions in the Democratic Party. So what is the genuine alternative? And for many of those who are watching, who know about the Socialist Equality Party and maybe those who are just finding out about us, we are the genuine socialists. We are the alternative. I'm the only socialist candidate running in the midterm elections, and we're fighting to put an end to war, put an end to social inequality, end the spying apparatus and internet censorship, and to expropriate the banks, transform the large corporations into public utilities, which are democratically run by the working class. I mean, that's a genuine socialist program, and that's what we're fighting to build a socialist leadership for the working class to fight for its own interests. There are a number of questions sort of related to the elections, which maybe I'll just go through them, and I think we can deal with them in the question of dealing with the alternative. So there's somebody who's watching from Austin, Texas, where there's the candidate for Senate, the Democratic candidate Beto O'Rourke, is really being promoted. He just raised $38 million, I think, in the last month. They say that the last quarter, which it's still astounding. They say that campaign posters are everywhere. Ted Cruz is despised. Bernie Sanders was hugely popular in Austin, and yet Beto is a millionaire with more money than Cruz, and he's not running as a left-wing candidate. He's what they would call a sort of moderate Democrat. Can you say something about it says, can you say something about how no one can even have a credible campaign without being rich or supported by the rich? So maybe we could talk about the question of money in politics. I mean, there's always this refrain that you got to get money out of politics. We've got to get money out of politics. But I mean, it's pretty clear that I mean that's the whole game. It's not you're not going to get money out of politics because it's a capitalist political game. The entire political system is set up in the interests of the capitalists. We have a government which operates in the interests of the capitalists, and we have two parties which are pro-capitalist parties.
Well, if you have a society in which 0.1% owns more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population, you can have all the rules you want, but that 0.1% is going to run the society because they own the means of production, they own the financial wealth. They will ultimately find a way to control the society. The only way to change that is to carry out a social revolution in which that wealth is taken from them physically through the intervention of the working class and redistributed and put under collective ownership and democratic control. There is absolutely no way to do that through the electoral process. You cannot have an election should all of Jeff Bezos' money be taken away from him and given to the people as a whole to manage. All right, because first of all, if you could get it on the ballot, Jeff Bezos wouldn't allow you to vote on it, and he can hire people to kill you to stop it from getting on the ballot, and he would. So, we oppose illusions that what we call in what we call parliamentarism. That is the idea that simply voting in elections is sufficient to change the economic, social structure of the country. We live in a class society. There is a ruling class. Marxism is not a myth. Marxism is a science. There is a ruling class that owns the means of production. There is a working class that works on the means of production and produces the wealth that the capitalists end up controlling. The only way to change that is for the working class to become conscious politically of its own role in society, and as the great, vast majority of the population, assume control of the society for itself. Now, that's our goal, all right? Niles isn't running because he wants to be the successor to Debbie Dingell in the halls of Congress. In some ways, that's probably a fate worse than death. But he's running because he's giving an alternative for the working class, not only in the Downriver and Ann Arbor areas, but throughout the country. He's setting an example for workers all over the country. We're only running in one district, but we're really running in all 435 because we're putting forward this alternative, we're putting it out on the internet, we're educating people, we're telling people, look, the the most important thing to understand in this election is the difference between the phony socialists and the real socialists. The phony socialists are a component of the Democratic Party out to rob you. All right? They're out to give you bogus, fake socialism. We call them pseudo-left because they are. You know, they're not left. It's a pretense. Look through Bernie Sanders' program and Ocasio-Cortez program for the transfer of wealth from the capitalists to the workers. This is ABC of socialism. Socialism means changing the economic structure of society. If it doesn't say that, it's nothing. You won't find it. That you look through the Democratic Socialists of America in their program, you will not find it.
They're not talking about expropriating the wealth.
Right.
They're not talking about putting the working class in control of society.
If there was truth in advertising, they would call themselves the Democratic Party fake socialists of America, you know, or pseudo-socialists of America, or the Democratic Party faction for fooling people into thinking that it's possible to get socialism through the Democratic Party. That's what they do. Now, we're not interested in that. You know, we don't want to sell illusions to workers, and we certainly don't want, like Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, to build political careers on the basis of it. We want to build a revolutionary movement in the working class based on telling the truth to the workers. People may not want to hear it from time to time. I understand in Texas. I feel your pain. Beto O'Rourke is very popular. All right, he had the largest rally in the history of Texas politics, although Willie Nelson had something to do with it, last week at 50,000 people. It may not be popular at this point to go and tell people that they're being sold a bill of goods.
Yeah.
But we have to tell them the truth. If Beto O'Rourke is elected to the U.S. Senate, this will not change the role of the U.S. Senate, of American imperialism, or anything else.
Right, and I mean, people just have to remember it. I mean, just in the last period, Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, and now they've got Beto O'Rourke and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Remember what Obama did. You know, think about what Sanders did in 2016, the role that he played in corralling opposition behind Hillary Clinton, the candidate that people hated, pro-war, pro-Wall Street. So it's important to study history, and it's not just talking about the last 100 years, but the last 10 years, the last 15 years. Remember the experiences that you went through. But I think your answer, Marty, or I think it gets to what I think should be our last question. The viewer asks, if you should win this election, how do you see yourself in Congress as the only socialist? What goals will you set for yourself? Well, as Marty was saying, I mean, with the purpose of this campaign, and if in the event that we win, the purpose would be to use it as a platform to advocate for genuine socialist policies, to fight to mobilize the working class, to fight in its own interests, to break with the Democratic Party, to break with the trade unions, to build new organizations of struggle, rank and file committees in their workplaces, and to fight for the expropriation of the wealth of society, the expropriation of the banks, transformation of companies like Amazon into public utilities run in the interests of humanity. That's really what we would use it for. I mean, having someone who's a socialist in Congress isn't going to change the situation. What's going to change the situation is a revolutionary movement of the working class, and that's what the Socialist Equality Party is fighting for.
I would just add that if you should win, and we don't rule out in the future the prospect of this or that candidate winning office, the result would be a political upheaval.
It would be a major crisis for the ruling
Because,
elite.
I mean, we know this from our own experience. We had candidates in Germany who won election to the student government of Humboldt University in Berlin, which is the most prestigious university in the country. And we won, our slate got, 4 candidates who were elected to the student government or the student legislature out of some 25 or 30 candidates, or 25 or 30 members who were elected. And the result of that was to horrify the German ruling elite. There was a ferocious press witch hunt against the IYSSE and the German Sozialistische Gleichheitspartei, I think I got it right, in the major newspapers published articles demonizing our party, demonizing our youth movement, claiming that we were persecuting these innocent pro-Nazi professors who we had exposed at Humboldt University, who were apologizing for Hitler. And we warned and we said this was going to lead to the legitimization of pro-Nazi politics. And we were absolutely proven right, because the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which is a pro-Nazi party, got 12 or 13% of the vote in the last election because they were legitimized by the political establishment, and now their anti-immigrant policy has become the policy of the German government. So yes, if we won, that would be an interesting development, and certainly I have no doubt that you would become the scourge of American imperialism in Washington. I would look forward to it, but it would also lead to a ferocious counter-reaction by the ruling elite, because they would be scared out of their minds. If you think about what their reaction was to Sanders flooding the Democratic Party with CIA agents, what do you think their reaction would be to the election of a real socialist?
Right.
Well, they would start saying, well, really, this election thing is overrated. You know, we shouldn't really have elections in this country because the people might vote for the wrong candidates.
Well, I think we're about to the end of our time here. I want to thank everyone for watching, for leaving your comments and questions. And again, please, if you donate $50 today, we'll send you a signed poster from our campaign. If you donate $10, we'll send you a button. My campaign is the only genuine socialist campaign in the midterm elections. So if you support socialism, if you're opposed to capitalism, support our campaign. Go to Niles2018.com, sign up, donate, and please support my campaign. And I want to thank you, Patrick, for being with us today.